So today we're talking about terminology contradictions and why the libertarian movement is slowly eating itself alive. And I say that as someone who genuinely wants us to survive and eventually win. Specifically, we're discussing libertarian nationalism, the latest buzzword that's going around online, which is a phrase that should bother you immediately if you have any historical literacy whatsoever. But we're also going to talk about why the specific terminology doesn't matter as much as what people are actually doing and where the real danger lies. You are listening to Free Talkcast, where we talk about news and current events from a perspective of peace, love, and liberty. I'm your host, Arya DeMezzo, and let's get right into things. So let's start with the obvious part. Nationalism killed tens of millions of people in the 20th century. Full stop. German nationalism, Italian nationalism, Japanese nationalism, and yes, there was also nationalism in places we don't talk about quite as much. But the point stands. Nationalism is a tried and tested tool for mobilizing populations towards state violence. It is the single most efficient marketing campaign for war and genocide that exists. So when I see libertarians, people who are supposedly committed to non-aggression and opposing state power, using the word nationalism unironically, my first instinct is to think that something has gone wrong. But here's where I'm going to separate myself from a lot of libertarians who immediately lose their minds about this. Does the terminology matter? Not as much as people think. During the 2012 presidential debates, Ron Paul was asked about gay marriage. Someone was trying to corner him on what the government should do, and Ron's answer was, sure, they can do whatever they want and call it whatever they want. That's my response to libertarian nationalism. If people want to identify as libertarian nationalists, they can. The word nationalist doesn't magically make their ideas coherent or incoherent. That's on the substance. I would say the same thing about libertarian socialists. I don't care what they call themselves. But, and this is important, it is a sign. It is a symptom. Because if you're going to use a term that contradictory, that loaded, that deliberately provocative, then you'd better be consistent about what contradictions you're willing to tolerate. And a lot of libertarian nationalists are not willing to tolerate. Recently, I posted on social media, I'm all for libertarian nationalism as a thing. I can't say I'd support the implementation of it, but as a thing that people can identify as a thing, I'm good with it. Some libertarians can have borders, some women can have penises. I don't see the problem. And I mean that genuinely. Yes, the dictionary definition of nation does not include the state. But again, during the 20th century, we saw nationalism cause tens of millions of deaths. So the idea of nationalism is inherently tied to the state in the minds of 99.9% of people. If you want to get all libertarian autistic about it and talk about what the definition technically means in the most strictest of sense that no one actually uses it for, that's fine. But you're using words that no one else uses in ways that no one else uses, and that makes communication impossible. So if you're comfortable with the label libertarian nationalist, which is to every ordinary person out there a direct contradiction in terms, then you should be comfortable with trans people. You should be comfortable with however people want to identify. You can't simultaneously defend contradictory terminology on philosophical grounds and then turn around and demand that everyone else conform to categorical purity. It reveals something. The objection isn't actually about logical consistency. It's about power. It's about who gets to define the boxes and who has to fit inside of them. This matters because when you're building a movement, especially a movement committed to non-coercion, you can't spend half your energy enforcing boundaries that have nothing to do with actual liberty. You just can't. Now, I'm not saying libertarian nationalism is coherent. I'm not saying it is incoherent. I'm not weighing in on the content of libertarian nationalism at all. I'm saying that if you're comfortable with naming a contradiction, own it. Don't get sanctimonious about other people doing the same thing. But the terminology issue isn't actually what I'm concerned about. What I'm concerned about is that libertarians are having lengthy, furious debates about theoretical abstractions while the state continues to exist in every territory on Earth. and there is no, let me be clear, absolutely no place on the planet where libertarian principles are currently being implemented at scale. Borders, national sovereignty, these are real mechanisms of state power right now. I think national borders are fundamentally incompatible with libertarianism. I think they require state enforcement to maintain, and state enforcement is coercion. So yeah, I disagree with the idea of libertarian borders in theory, but that theory is academic. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter right now, and it won't matter for decades, maybe centuries, if it ever matters at all. You want to know why? Because the state controls every inch of land on this planet. Every single inch. There is nowhere to implement libertarian ideas, pure or mixed or hybrid or nationalist or whatever you want to call them. We don't have a sandbox to test these things and make it matter whether the libertarian society has borders or doesn't have borders. So when I see libertarians spending their energy arguing about theoretical permutations of a system that can't be implemented anyway, I see people who have lost sight of what actually matters. What matters is persuasion. What matters is converting people to libertarianism. That's the only pathway to freedom that doesn't involve violence and coercion. That's the only pathway that doesn't just recreate the problem we're trying to solve. And you can't persuade people while you're simultaneously kicking them out of the movement for insufficient philosophical orthodoxy. Which brings me to New Hampshire and the Free State Project, which is the living embodiment of what happens when libertarians forget that persuasion is the only tool that works. I recently saw a New Hampshire native say something that resonated with me and that horrified me. You Free Staters aren't about assimilation. You came as conquerors to take over New Hampshire and kick out everyone else. And they're right. A lot of Free Staters openly say this. If you aren't a libertarian, Massachusetts and Vermont are right there. They say it like it's a clever quip. They say it like they have the numbers to make it happen. They don't. Free Staters are heavily outnumbered in New Hampshire. Even with decades of immigration and organizing, Free Staters are a minority. So what they're actually doing is alienating the people they need to persuade. They're signaling that they view non-libertarians as a problem. They're signaling that coexistence is impossible. They're signaling that there's a correct way to think and everyone else needs to leave. Does that sound familiar? That's not how you build a free society. That's how you implement nationalism that leads to deaths of tens of millions of people, but it's not how you build a free society. That's how you build a faction that will get crushed the moment the political winds shift. And it deserves to be, frankly, because you violated the first principle, non-aggression. Not through violence, but through the implication that if people don't conform, they're unwelcome in their own state, in their own homes. The only pathway to free state success, the only one, is persuasion. You just have to convince people that libertarian is better. And look, if you have trouble selling the ideas of freedom and prosperity to people, then you're the problem. If you can't persuade a person that freedom and prosperity and peace are good things, then you are the problem. These ideas sell themselves. Peace, love, liberty, prosperity. These ideas sell themselves. All you have to do is not get in the way. So if these ideas are not selling themselves, we desperately need you to get out of the way. With all of this working for you, you just have to convince people that libertarianism is better. And you have to do it in person. You have to be likable while you're doing it. You have to be forgiving of people's mistakes and inconsistencies. Because the moment you start treating politics like conquest, you've lost. The statists have something you don't. They have institutional power. They have force. The only advantage you have, and I mean this, the only advantage libertarians have is moral consistency. The argument that voluntary cooperation is better than coercion. The argument that people thrive when they're free to make their own choices. If you abandon that argument in favor of making people feel unwelcome, in favor of just not arguing with them entirely and making them go away somehow without using force, violence, and coercion, although a lot of these libertarians are all about physical removal, then what do you have? What are you at the end of all of that? You're just another faction fighting for power, and you will lose to the faction that's actually good at political violence. The thing about trying to establish freedom through force or even through exclusion, it doesn't work, it can't work, and it has never worked. If you somehow manage to get everyone who disagrees with you to leave New Hampshire, you haven't solved anything. You've just created a territory where your ideas are temporarily dominant. And what happens when people change their minds? What happens when the next generation asks questions? What happens when someone from Massachusetts drives over and starts talking to people about the benefits of state welfare? Do you kick them out? Do you use force to maintain ideological purity? Because if you do, congratulations, you're the state. You just built a smaller libertarian state. You've recreated the exact problem you were trying to solve. The only way out of this is if people are genuinely persuaded that libertarianism is better. Not coerced, not excluded, persuaded. And persuasion takes time and patience. It takes forgiving people for not understanding yet. It takes meeting them where they are, not making them leave to somewhere else. And the statists understand this. That's why they spent a century building institutions. That's why they control the schools, the media, the cultural narrative. They're not relying on force alone to maintain their system. They're maintaining it through persuasion, through cultural conditioning. They have convinced everyone that the state is better, that social welfare is better, that who will build the roads? Through making statism seem inevitable and libertarianism seem crazy. That's how the state maintains itself, not through force, violence, and control. Those are just the mechanisms of last resort. And you're thinking you're going to beat that, all of that indoctrination with conquest mentality? You're supposed to beat the state at conquest mentality? You're supposed to beat all of that indoctrination by telling people they need to leave? No, it's never going to happen. You beat it by being better at persuasion, by being smarter, by being more forgiving, by being more loving, by living in a way that demonstrates that voluntary cooperation actually works. But there's another way. The movement is destroying itself from within, and it's directly connected to this conquest mentality. We have an absolutely massive infighting problem. Personal disputes, ideological purity tests, people treating other libertarians as enemies because they don't agree on every single detail, or because they did this one thing once upon a time, or because they fall short in one area or another. I'm seeing more grifting than ever. People building followings by attacking other libertarians and selling courses or books or whatever. I'm seeing more backstabbing, more accusations, more people treating libertarianism like it's a zero-sum game where someone else's success is your loss. And here's what all of that does. It serves the state. It only serves the state. You want to know why libertarians don't win? This is half the reason. The other half is that we're outnumbered. But we will always be outnumbered if we spend all of our energy in fighting. The half of the reason that we're always losing that we can control, this is it. It's the infighting. We spend our energy fighting each other instead of converting people. Think about how insane that is. We're trying to convince the world that voluntary cooperation is better than coercion, and we can't stop fighting with each other about dumb shit. We can't forgive each other for even minor disagreements. We can't build stable coalitions because everyone's worried about ideological contamination. Meanwhile, progressives and conservatives who disagree with each other on everything manage to maintain their coalitions, manage to maintain the state because they're united on one thing. They want power. That's it. That's the glue. And it works. It's terrible for freedom, but it works. And we have something better. We have a philosophy that's actually consistent. We have principles that actually work. And we're squandering it on purity tests and personal grudges. Here's something that I think about a lot. However great we think we are, we always fall short in the eyes of someone else. Not one of us is perfect. Not one of us has thought through every implication of libertarianism. Not one of us acts consistently with our principles at every moment of every day. We live in a coercive system, and we're forced to participate in it. We have to. And that means we're always compromising somewhere. Every single libertarian out there is always compromising with the state somewhere. Some libertarians think borders are okay. I don't. Some think intellectual property is justified. I'm skeptical of that. Some think markets solve everything. I think markets are a tool, but they're not magic. And some people focus on drugs. Some focus on war. Some focus on economics. And some, for reasons that no one will understand, focus on age of consent questions. Some focus on other social issues. We disagree. That's not a bug of a free people thinking ideas through and talking them out. That's a feature. That's what intellectual diversity looks like. But what we cannot do, what we absolutely cannot do, is treat our fellow libertarians like they're the enemy. Because if we do that, we're no different from the left-right binary that the mainstream throws at people. We're just creating another false choice. Libertarianism or nothing. If we want to achieve a free society, we have to be able to disagree with each other and still respect each other. We have to be able to forgive each other for our failures and our inconsistencies. We have to be able to work together despite our differences. The people who want to use force, violence, and coercion to maintain state power, they have no moral qualms about doing that. They're explicitly okay with it. That's the entire justification for the government. The only thing that can beat that is a movement of people who have decided that voluntary cooperation and non-aggression actually work, not as a temporary tactic, as a permanent commitment. And if we can't even do that internally, how are we going to convince millions of people to do it? So what's the solution here? First, stop the conquest mentality. New Hampshire isn't a military campaign. The Free State Project isn't a military conquest. This is where people live. People live here, guys. This is people's homes. If you want to move here and make it more free, that's great. But you have to do it by convincing people, not by treating them like obstacles to be removed. Second, these purity tests have to go. You don't have to agree with someone on every philosophical detail to work with them on the things that you do agree on. The left has figured this out. The right has figured this out. Why haven't libertarians? Ron Paul and left libertarians don't agree on much, but they both oppose war. They both support freedom. That's enough. That's the starting point. Third, stop the grifting. Stop the backstabbing. Stop treating other libertarians as competition for status. We're all on the same side, whether you believe in perfect liberty or 90% liberty. The difference between us is nothing compared to the difference between us and people who are okay with drone strikes and mass incarceration. Fourth, build institutions that are actually about persuasion, not power. I used to do the radio show Free Talk Live, and it was all about persuading people to the ideas of liberty. It was all about building some beautiful libertarian society. Come here, help us build this wonderful thing. But if you look at it now, all it's about is, if you're not a libertarian, you have to go. It's not about building persuasion. It's not about building unity and bringing people here and creating a thing. It's about chasing out what is here. It has fundamentally altered its purpose. It's no longer persuading people to be libertarians. It's saying, if you're not libertarianism, you're bad, you're evil, you're the scum of the earth, and you have to go. And that is not going to convince anyone. And we don't have the numbers, guys. You have to convince people. And this isn't just at Free Talk Live. This is about the idea that you have to convince people still. You have to persuade them. You don't have the multi-million man army standing behind you that you seem to think that you have. You have to talk to people, persuade them, create media that persuades them, that convinces them that the ideas that you're espousing are better than the ideas that they already believe. You have to learn to explain libertarian ideas in a way that makes sense to people who don't already agree with you. This is hard work. It's tedious. It doesn't get you very many followers, doesn't get you money, and it doesn't get you status. But it's the only thing that actually works. Fifth, when someone messes up, and they will, forgive them. When someone says something dumb, and they will, correct them gently and move on. When someone disagrees with you, and they will, remember that they're probably starting from a place of genuine concern about something. Because if we're going to persuade billions of people to voluntarily cooperate with each other, we have to demonstrate that we can voluntarily cooperate with each other. We have to do it among ourselves. So look, I get the appeal of all of these phrases. Libertarian nationalism, free state conquest. They're provocative. They feel like you're staking out territory. They feel like you're taking a stand. But they're also symptoms of a movement that's lost sight of what actually matters. What matters is freedom. Persuading people to embrace the ideas of liberty. Not terminology, not territory, not who gets to be the most ideological pure. Freedom. And the only path to freedom is persuasion, which means patience, which means forgiveness, which means being able to work with people who disagree with you. And if we can't do that, We deserve to lose.